Perhaps if you were at Avodat Halev, you've had enough of me, but we have a little bit more today.
Never have too much of you.
Oh, you're so sweet. Maybe at that. Well, wouldn't we all agree that it has been quite a week? The Shabbat is so needed as a time to catch our breath, fill our lungs and hearts and kishkas with the love of Hashem to fortify us, releasing the fears, the exhaustion, and the burdens of a news-packed week. And this week's Parsha, the end, brings us into the heart of one of Torah's most dramatic confrontations. God against Pharaoh, liberation against oppression, divine power against human arrogance. And at the same time, the Haftorah from Ezekiel echoes these themes, offering a vision of redemption and justice that transcends time and space and place. So together, these texts challenge us to reflect not only on the story of our ancestors, but on the spiritual truths that shape our lives today. So we're going to begin with Pharaoh, a ruler so consumed by his own sense of power that he refuses to recognize God's sovereignty. His arrogance blinds him to the reality unfolding before his eyes. The plagues that disrupt Egypt's natural world, each one a declaration of divine authority. Pharaoh's words, "So who's this Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go?" echoes throughout history as the epitome of hubris. Again and again, Pharaoh tells Moses he will let the Israelites go. And then his heart hardens and he reneges. The Pharaoh is so caught up in his personal power pursuits, in grasping and clinging, in greed and lust for power, in wanting to be in control. He thinks he, not God, is running the show. Yet, can we allow ourselves to feel any human connection to this man who is so unyielding and behave so cruelly? A man who refuses to acknowledge God's authority, even as Egypt suffers under the plagues. Pharaoh's kaved lev, his hardened heart, can be seen as a manifestation of his ego's resistance to transformation and refusal to confront his own shadow. His kaved lev shuts him off from his life-giving breath, and we can see that he is spiritually suffocating. Pharaoh is so consumed by his own ego and his need for control that he cannot breathe in the ruach of humility, compassion, or God's presence. He clings to this illusion of power, even as it suffocates his own people and himself. So as Rabbi Gold put it, the Pharaoh within is the part of us that oppresses the spirit and has kept us in slavery, chained to a familiar, constricting habit. So like Pharaoh, how often do each of us make promises under adversity, then go back to our same old conditioned responses once there is some respite? Psychoanalyst Erich Fromm wrote, "Every evil act tends to harden man's heart. Every good act tends to soften it, to make it more alive. The more a man's heart hardens, the less freedom he has to change. But the more he is determined by previous action, there comes a point of no return, when man's heart has become so hardened that he has lost the possibility of freedom." So how often do we harden our own hearts, refusing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths or relinquish control? I particularly connect with this parsha as a lesson of sacred breath, the ruach of Torah's vision of life. As one who has been practicing meditation for many decades, I am thankful to engage in a mindfulness practice that reminds me that each breath is an opportunity to return, that the possibility of freedom is available no matter how far I have strayed. This practice of slowing down and noticing helps me to explore what shuts down my heart and what helps me to soften and open. And through a mindfulness practice, I am more inclined to develop wisdom which in turn, I pray, leads to wise action, lessening the suffering I inflict on myself, on others, and Baruch Hashem, on the world. When practicing a form of mindfulness, I recognize we may have limited control over the Pharaoh out there, but inside each of us, we have the capacity to slowly, gradually release ourselves from slavery. The Haftorah from Ezekiel picks up on this theme, describing another Pharaoh who describes, "The Nile is mine, I made it." And like his predecessor in Exodus, this Pharaoh exalts himself as a god, claiming ultimate control over nature and destiny. And in both cases, God's response is clear. No human power, no matter how great it seems, can stand against divine will. So this is the first lesson of Va'era and its Haftorah. Human power is fleeting, but God's justice and love is eternal. Pharaohs rise and fall, but the story of redemption continues. And Pharaoh's Egypt is a world that chokes off the breath of others. His rule depends on suppression, on keeping people voiceless and powerless. This is the nature of all oppressive systems. They cut off the flow of life and spirit, forcing people into a state of constriction. And yet these texts are not only about despair and judgment, they are also about hope. For in Va'era, God promises Moses the 4 expressions of redemption. Hotzeti, I will take you out from under the burdens of Egypt. Hitzalti, I will save you from bondage. Ga'alti, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and great judgments. Lakachti, I will take you to me as a people. This is not just a promise of physical redemption and liberation. It is a promise of transformation. God is not only freeing the Israelites from slavery, but also forging them into a covenantal people, bound to God and to one another. And when God promises the Israelites, I will take you out from under the burden of Egypt, it is a promise to restore their ability to breathe. Redemption is not only about leaving slavery behind, it's about reconnecting to the Ruach, the sacred breath of life. The Ruach Elohim, the breath of God, is also present in Ezekiel's Haftorah. God speaks to the exiles, promising to gather them and bring them home. And though breathless from their suffering, they will once again feel the divine presence. They shall dwell securely on their land, and they shall know that I am their God. Ezekiel's vision anticipates the climactic prophecy of the Valley of Dry Bones, where God brings life to the lifeless by breathing into them. This is the ultimate vision of redemption, a world where every soul can breathe freely, connected to God and to one another. And through the lens of depth psychology, breath is often seen as a symbol of life force and spiritual vitality. So when we feel anxious, oppressed, or overwhelmed, our breath constricts. Pharaoh's hardness of heart can be seen as a metaphor for this spiritual constriction, his inability in breath to breathe in God's presence or make space for others. But by contrast, the journey of redemption is a process of expanding breath, of moving from constriction to openness. The Israelite cries at their first exhalation, their first step toward liberation. And God promises, I will take you out. I will save you. I will redeem you. I will take you to me. Those are like deep breaths, each one opening their spirit and their futures. So what does this mean for us here today? And I ask you to take a moment. We won't go into dyads, which I imagine, but just take a moment to think about Where in your life do you feel spiritually breathless, constricted, or stuck? How can you invite the divine Ruach to flow through you and restore your sense of freedom? How can we, as individuals and as a community, act as vessels of the sacred breath, creating spaces where others can breathe freely and flourish? Parsha Ve'era reminds us that redemption begins with breath, with the cry of the oppressed, the disruption of the oppressor, and the promise of divine Ruach flowing through our lives. The Ruach Elohim is the sacred force that animates us, connects us, and leads us toward liberation. The promise of redemption challenges us to trust in God's process, even when it unfolds slowly or in ways we may not understand. We need to cultivate moments and practices to notice how we are being called. So when caught in a flurry of discombobulating news, we can choose to slow down, take a breath, maybe even a few, to remind ourselves that redemption is both God's work and our calling. God brings justice and liberation, and also calls us into partnership to fight against oppression, to live lives of responsibility, and to trust in God's enduring promises, one breath at a time. So as we navigate through the coming week, may we find inspiration in the words of our Torah, our prophets, and our Ruach HaKodesh. May we embrace the call to be partners in God's work of liberation, planting seeds of justice and hope in the soil of our world. And may each one of us have the courage to soften our hearts, to listen to the cries of those who cannot breathe, and to become channels for God's breath of redemption in the world. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.